Thanks to everyone attending today's TOC webcast. And as you've undoubtedly noticed, the self-publishing world is growing by leaps and bounds, and even though self-publishing's growth has mostly occurred outside the world of traditional publishing, I don't feel anyone in traditional publishing can afford to ignore it. So I've met with several self-publishing executives over the past few years, and every time I speak with one of them, I come away having learned something new. With that in mind, I figured it was time to bring some of these self-publishing leaders together to share the lessons they've learned, and particularly why those lessons are important to us in traditional publishing. So for today's webcast, we've assembled four of the most insightful experts in the self-publishing sector. We're giving each of them 10 to 12 minutes to talk about their lessons learned, and we've also set aside Q&A time for each one of them. As moderator of the webcast, I'll keep a close eye on that chat window that Catherine was talking about, and time permitting, I'll ask the speakers as many of the audience questions as possible. So our first speaker is Mark Coker, the founder of Smashwords, and I've known Mark since the early days of Smashwords, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the earliest beta testers of the service. Smashwords serves up tens of thousands of self-published titles, and it seems every week I receive yet another press release about an important new distributor or partnership agreement that they've signed. So, Mark, welcome to the webcast.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here. So I've got a lot of slides. I'll go through them very quickly. So first, just an introduction to Smashwords and where I'm coming from and what my biases are. We are an ebook publishing and distribution platform. That's all a fancy word for ebook distributor. We make it really easy for any author anywhere in the world to instantly publish a multi-format ebook, and then if the book meets certain mechanical requirements, we distribute it to major retailers such as Barnes & Noble, Sony, Apple, Kobo, and others. We return 85% of the net to the author-publisher. So this is what's happened over the last few years since we launched. 140 titles in the first year, 6,000 in 2009, did almost 30,000 by the end of last year. We're at about 55,000 today, and we'll surpass 75,000 titles at the end of this year. My presentation will be a mix of best practices learned from my observations of the most commercially successful self-published authors at Smashwords. It'll also be a mix of opinion and some bastardized Eastern philosophy. So we'll start with some of that. The first lesson I think you can learn from self-published authors is that most of them are dirt poor. They don't have the benefit of multi-million-dollar marketing budgets to promote their books. Because they're practicing poverty, they need to think more creatively and do more creative things. And so I think through necessity, you'll see a lot of the innovation, I think, happening in publishing today is happening with the indies. So as a publisher, embrace your inner poverty and minimize your expenses. Expenses will be the enemy of publishing in the future. Think tantric publishing. So some of you are probably thinking, I'm talking about tantric sex. Well, I kind of am. So lodge that thought in your brain. The traditional way of launching a book is kind of a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am experience. The book is, after a year of build-up, is released to retailers, and if it doesn't sell through quickly, it's returned back to the publisher or the distributor. I challenge you to think differently. Get intimate with your customer. Now, your customer is not the distributor, it's not the retailer, it's the reader, it's the person who purchases the book. So I want you to think about pleasuring your customer. Now, this goes beyond just making your customer happy and pleasing them. I want you to get inside their brains. The biggest organ, pleasure organ in the human body is the brain. Focus on providing them an incredible reading experience. Trust your customer. If you're going to get in bed with your customer, and I challenge you to do that as a long-term endeavor, relationships are built on trust. Now, ask yourself, would you get in bed with someone who's threatening to handcuff your arms and limbs to the bedposts? Well, that's what DRM is. If you use DRM, you're telling your customer you don't trust them. So that's not a very good basis for the start of a long-term relationship with your customer. Release everything. Self-published authors believe in what they're writing. They're writing for reasons different than publishers publish, and they release it. And they let readers decide what's worth reading. So I challenge you to release all of your content. If you've got content that's not yet digitized and available as an ebook, get it available as soon as possible. If you've got out-of-print backlist, make it available as print on demand. Get everything out there. Let the readers decide. Publish faster. Self-published authors, once their manuscript is completed, can publish in minutes. In minutes, they can reach a worldwide audience. Traditional publishers typically wait a year before the book is released. So you're at a tremendous disadvantage if you're publishing on that under that slow motion model. Price lower. Customers don't want to pay too much for quality content. If quality is the same across multiple titles, they're going to go with a lower cost title. So think about that. Sell worldwide and maximize your distribution. A lot of publishers still restrict distribution based on arcane geographic rights limitations. Don't do that. A self-published author publishes today and reaches a worldwide audience instantly. So if you are carving up your rights, carve them by language. Don't carve them by geography. Geographic limitation will only limit the ability for you to reach readers. It'll create black holes in the marketplace that encourage piracy, which is the biggest fear of most publishers. Think about the never-ending book launch. Again, don't do the wham bam thank you ma'am experience where you throw the book out there and then you wait to see if it sticks to the wall. Instead, do what the most successful self-published authors do. Remain actively involved in your book forever, especially with ebooks. Ebooks never go out of print, so they require constant love and attention. So remain actively involved with that book. Don't forget about it. Experiment. Some of the most successful indie authors are always experimenting. They're always trying new things. They'll update the cover image of the book. They'll update their book descriptions. They'll update their prices. They'll test. All of most of the major ebook retailing platforms provide instant reporting, so you can see immediately how your experiments are working. So continue to evolve. Try new things. Embrace the future. Don't fear the future. We're in the midst today of dramatic, wrenching change, and it's scary. Your opportunity is to leverage this change to your benefit and don't do things that are counterproductive to your future as a publisher. This is an exciting time. Your opportunity to reach readers has never been greater before. Self-publishing is not the enemy of traditional publishing. We have an opportunity to work together to help deliver more books to more readers and make more readers happier. Thanks.
So thanks, Mark. Hey, so you talked a little bit about DRM, and I wanted to just follow up with you on a quick question there, because I'm wondering, with all the authors that you deal with on a regular basis, how many of them do you suppose understand what DRM is all about, and are they open? I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, you can persuade them, but do they feel like they're taking a risk by not using DRM, or what's the general perception?
Well, the general perception, again, I would go back to the poverty that most authors face. They don't have the benefit of brick-and-mortar distribution. They don't have the benefit of large marketing budgets, so they're forced to think of other ways to connect with readers and make readers happy. Most indie authors don't know what DRM is, but those who do know what DRM is, they typically feel very passionate about the importance of DRM-free. They don't want to erect artificial barriers that get in the way of their readers enjoying their books. And if indie authors believe that DRM-free is an advantage they can have over traditional publishers, they embrace it very quickly. there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there about piracy. A lot of that is fueled by vendors of producers of DRM technology, and also, the large publishers are responsible for fanning a lot of that fear. But if you think about it, a lot of the publishers' own actions help encourage piracy. When you license a book based on geography, you're creating these massive black holes of unavailability for your book. So publishers out there creating demand for the book, but they're not fulfilling it.
Right, okay. So a couple folks have tapped into something I wanted to ask you about anyhow, and that is your point about discoverability. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in general, traditional and self-publishing. And I'm just kind of curious to see what sort of lessons you've learned there and what kind of techniques. I mean, you talked about the launch never ending, and I think that's important as well. But it still feels like there's just so much content out there, and if somebody could solve that discoverability problem, it would help all of us. So any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think the biggest secret is to maximize your distribution. You need to make your book widely available where customers are shopping. So one of the mistakes that we see some indie authors making, and larger publishers as well, is that they put all their eggs in the basket of one or two big retailers and ignore the mid-sized retailers or the smaller retailers. So that's a mistake. I think that really the most important thing is to make sure that your book is available and discoverable. Leverage the capabilities of these online retailers who are investing tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars to attract readers to their online bookstores and attract readers to their reading platforms. Many readers are going to these stores to discover their next great read, and they don't necessarily have a particular author in mind. They may drill down into the categories that interest them the most and then tap into the collective wisdom of their fellow customers to decide what books to buy next. So I think that's the biggest piece of discoverability.
Right, okay. So we're running out of time. There's plenty of great questions that have come in, and actually, if you wouldn't mind checking out the group chat window on them, but I did want to ask you one last one that I saw here from Agatha, and I think a lot of folks probably have this question because there's a number of traditional publishers on this call, obviously, and they're wondering what can they do to work with Smashwords? In other words, could Smashwords be a partner of theirs?
Well, yes, definitely. Our primary business is distribution. Although we operate our own very small retail operation at smashwords.com, over 80% of our sales are coming from distribution. So we are ready, willing, and able to work with publishers to help them distribute their content, as well as letting them take advantage of some of the selling and marketing tools that are available on the Smashwords platform.
Terrific. Okay, thanks again, Mark. Our next speaker is Chad Jennings, Vice President of Product at Blurb. Chad brings a developer's perspective to the webcast as he oversees Blurb's Webby award-winning site, as well as their content creation tools and product strategy. Chad, welcome to the webcast.
Hi, thank you so much. As I mentioned, I'm Chad Jennings, VP of Product and actually a founding employee at Blurb. So just quick about Blurb. So Blurb is a rich media authoring, sharing, and distribution platform. We focused on books, and books for self-publishing, for business, and personal books, although our focus has been and continues to be on our full graphical color books. So think about cookbooks and children's books and photography books, fundraiser books and yearbooks, and kind of a mix of color, graphical, and beautiful books. We provide a variety of creation tools that help people get these books created and laid out from professionals to consumers. We, like many on the call, have a sellers program where you can put your book for sale on blurb.com and keep 100% of the profits. We have around 750,000 customers and printed about 1.4 million books in 2010 alone, and have paid out around $2 million in author profits. We're global and ship to 75 countries on 5 continents. And in the end, we're a VC-backed profitable company with $58 million in revenue in 2010. So, like we were being asked to talk a little bit about a few lessons learned, and this really, I think, which we all agree on the call, a few lessons still being learned. And as Joe said, I'm going to take a little bit of a product and user experience spin on that because that is actually my background. So let's dive in here. So the first question we tend to ask ourselves a lot at Blurb, every year is what business are we really in? So I think in talking with publishers or anyone even in startups, asking that question over and over again because it sometimes can shift over the course of a business. So what we say now is we're actually in the kind of storytelling and creative expression business. Book creators and self-publishers are not just looking for profit, right? We have tons of people using personal gifts, using it for business promotion, using books as a promotional tool, using books as something they sell out of their corner independent bookstore, using books as a closure for this creative outlet that they've created. And so, I put this out there from my point of view, is Blurb at its core is really a technology company, not necessarily a publisher. And so our approach to how we build our platform and the tools we use comes a bit out of that. So we really needed to set out to build a platform that could handle, our 2 orders per second at peak and millions of books coming through. We focus a lot on our product and engineering team, which makes up a good, over half of our 80-person company, of finding the best engineers and designers and user experience designers and getting them on staff, and really building around kind of agile software development processes where we release something every week to get out there and keep improving our products and learn from it. In the end, it's really about building a self-service platform. So let me talk specifically about some learnings on that. For us, it's really about building creation tools, not just distribution channels or an upload button. For example, we have a free desktop tool, Booksmart for book layout, web tools, an InDesign plugin, a Lightroom plugin, a public API, an ebook creation tool in alpha. We don't want to just rely on others to own the creation experience because, frankly, most creation experiences kind of stink. They're kind of hard to use, confusing, and as much as I think authors use Word, they may not love Word, or you could buy InDesign for $900 and try to learn that too. So for us, it really is trying to use easy-to-use, best-of-breed creation tools that support consumers to professionals. And it also, from a psychological point of view, helps us tap kind of into this IKEA effect, where people spend a lot of time and loving time laying out their book and putting the book together, and therefore they want to publish it and stick with Blurb throughout that process and our brand. So create once, publish anywhere to any format. Again, this is hard. And I think in the end, everything still starts with a really good story, right? It's a collection of text and images inside what we kind of reference as a book, book interface, right, that we all have lived on for millennia. So now authors want this in many forms, right, which you're hearing on the call today. There's ebook in 4 different flavors, a limited edition high-end print book, a fixed format or enhanced ebook, an iPhone app available on the web with social media integration, whatever's coming next. So for us, the big question is how do we support this need for a liquid book that really adapts its form as needed, right? And so one of the challenges is actually PDFs are not very good at this. So for us, it's figuring out how do we get books in a format. Well, hey, you may come to Blurb for a printed book, but then you can get that in ebook. You can eventually get that in an iPhone app. You can get into that online in different ways. So there's certainly a healthy business out there for, I think, anyone that kind of really figures that out. About here. Okay, so let 100 flowers blossom. This is a quote from Guy Kawasaki, who was taken from Chairman Mao, who's probably turning in his grave. That is how I'm using this context. But fail fast is a bit of a cliche now, but really this gets back to taking a technology company approach, which is about experimentation, which Mark talked about too, right? Both from a company point of view as well as promoting that within your authors and creators. So customers will use your product in ways that we cannot imagine. So you need to put stuff out there, see what people do with it, and then drive into those places. So innovators need to be flexible about how people will use their products. So a couple examples used are, Avon created Skin So Soft to soften skin, but when parents used it as an insect repellent, Avon went with the flow. Apple, of course, started out as a spreadsheet and database and word processing computer, but customers use it as a desktop publishing machine. The lesson is kind of don't be proud, let 100 flowers blossom. For Blurb, starting out, actually we found professional photographers, designers, and creative professionals found us. Companies started using us for not only self-publishing, but also print collateral, personal books, starting to use us for fundraising, and then build better tools for the audience. So here is Here's my obligatory long tail slide. I think this comes up as we start talking about how do we find stuff in this realm. It's really about understanding the metadata and kind of the semantic structure of your book, right, of that data. In the end, it is about connecting audiences or connecting authors to audiences, right, and building audiences, whether that's just family, friends, fans, or a mass market. To that end, which Mark talked about, filtering and elevating will become even more of a challenge for self-publishers and publishers in general. We need to get our head around what's the non-traditional categorization scheme to help find the book within the chafe. I wonder when authors will actually start writing hashtags directly into their work, right? This kind of self-forming way to organize your work. So you may be familiar with Kevin Kelly's kind of 1,000 True Fans, but it's something we think about a lot. What this means is Kevin Kelly said, look, if you're an author, an artist, and you can find 1,000 fans willing to pay $100 a year for your art or your writing or your creation, that's $100,000 a year in salary. That is something that's doable, right? So we can argue the finer points of that, but that's really the need we're trying to fulfill. And so to close, I want to talk a little bit and be a little out there and talking about ebooks and EPUB. So EPUB is not necessarily the future of ebooks, I would say. It's just the present. So we can push technology to give much more beauty and subtlety to ebooks than what EPUB allows. So Blurb is about creating beautiful books. EPUB 3 helps us get it there. But we can also use the same open technologies available now for websites, but have yet to come to ebooks or apps, right? So how can we balance our current standards, which may be EPUB or its variety of formats, right, across whoever you're trying to publish to, with future standards? When do we start really embracing HTML5 potentially as the future for reading? This is just the beginning of an experiment for publishing. We haven't yet found the final form of what an ebook is. It is the beginning of lots of experimentation. For Blurb, not the least of all. And we don't have to wait to see what will work for consumers. We can just try it. We all need to keep trying different ways of publishing until there's a scheme that works well for everyone. And the future belongs to whatever publishing formats work best for authors, and readers. Nothing's inevitable. Publishing ebooks does not require lots of upfront investment, so we can keep trying different ways of making ebooks until there's a scheme that works well for all. That's the wonder and risk of kind of being a publisher and technology company where we're at right now. A little bit of lessons learned through the ages in this one, and not to get on a high horse, but books have been practical vessels for stories for hundreds of years in much more primitive forms. The books themselves don't need special protection. As I hear this thing of like the future of book, is book going to continue? Book is dead. I think I always ask the question, did MP3 kill music? No. Did YouTube or .move kill movies? No. That we remember the format is not necessarily equal to content, right? Content does adapt slightly to new mediums, but in the end, it all comes back to creating a good story, right? And whether that's for personal use, promotion, or self-publishing for profit. So thank you. Just to note, I'm in the Twitterverse at Chad Jennings, and I'm not able to get in a group chat right now to answer questions, but hopefully in a little bit.
Thanks, Chad. So a couple questions have come in. I think most of the folks on the webcast are familiar with Blurb and some of the just richly illustrated full-color books that have been published through Blurb. But folks were also kind of wondering about e-books and e-content and what direction you're heading in there. So can you talk for a moment just about what the plans are and how your audience and your customers are embracing e-content versus print?
Right, yeah. So how we're approaching it, we started to look at ebooks. We started to say, what's Blurb really good at? And we said, gosh, we want to make beautiful ebooks, right? And so where we're at right now is we're in the middle of an alpha creation tool for ebooks with kind of a focus right now on initially fixed format books and publishing to the Apple iPad and a color experience, because most of our books tend to be color and kind of fall apart and look really crappy and ugly on the Kindle right now. And in the sense, if we know that trend is towards color, right, Amazon will come out with their color Android tablet probably here in the fall, right? So in the sense, we're positioning ourselves for that, and we think ebooks, right now in its early days, actually typography and color, layout, even for text-heavy books, will become even more important. Books are black and white because it was cheap to print black and white books. So color and graphics will become even more important in the future. And so what we're doing, again, is our unique approach. We're trying to build creation tools that make it easy for anyone to create beautiful ebooks, and that's where we're at right now. So we're in the midst of an alpha. If anyone's interested in checking that out, feel free to email me. We'll be coming out the beta, and then it launched sometime later this year of our own ebook creation tool and distribution system.
Okay, terrific. And then regarding formats, it sounds like you're going to be supporting EPUB. Are you able to tell us if you'll also be supporting MOBI and PDF, and what about DRM?
Yeah, well, so we kind of take the same approach as Mark as DRM in the sense we're trying to create a really open standard. And yes, in our books, as we flesh out our vision, you should be able to create your book once and get it in EPUB, HTML, MOBI, and translate it through. One of the challenges is kind of we're in the midst of a bit of a standards war, right? Apple has their own take of EPUB, Amazon has their own take of EPUB, even Barnes & Noble has a fixed format EPUB, there's then PDF out there. And so as we flesh this out, it's kind of saying, hey, we want to go along with the standard now. EPUB 3 is getting much better, but I think the question at hand is when do we all just say, hey, what's the one technology that's going to be around in 5 years is probably going to be HTML, right? And so when do we potentially make that translation to that way? Because in the end, e-readers are just web browsers, right? They're just representations of XHTML and CSS. That's all they are. And there's some great power there, and that's also why I think Google's so interested in it, in that if you imagine you have a web page that is 400 pages long and has a time on site of 6 hours a day, there's a lot of power there from both findability, right, as well as indexability of content that becomes pretty exciting, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, I think that one point you just made a moment ago is maybe one of the most important ones that I've heard in a while is just how important HTML is. And like you said, these formats at their heart are, XML or HTML, and so does it all lead eventually up to an HTML solution? And I think we tend to get so hung up on EPUB and MOBI and so forth that we sort of lose sight of that. So great point. Okay, well, thanks, Chad. Next up, we've got Pete Nikolai of Westbow Press. And unlike the other speakers that we have today, Pete comes from a self-publishing operation that was built within a traditional publishing house. And that traditional publisher, which is Thomas Nelson, decided that they need to have a presence in the self-publishing space. So Pete brings a very unique perspective to the table, one that should be particularly interesting to any of us in the traditional publishing space, especially if you're thinking about spinning up your own self-publishing operation. Pete, welcome to the webcast.
Oh, great, Joe. Thanks so much for the opportunity. A little bit of background, perhaps, to get started. Thomas Nelson, as a publisher, we've been around for over 200 years, and similar to many traditional publishers, our stance towards aspiring authors evolved over the years to the point where we had a no unsolicited manuscripts policy. Similar to many publishers, we have built walls to enforce it and to, in many ways, just simplify our workloads. But as we followed the growth of self-publishing, we had discussions with several companies over the years and decided that we did want to be involved in that space. So we formed a partnership with Author Solutions and launched in November of 2009. Since then, we've signed over 1,500 authors and released over 600 books. We recently announced the first Westbow title that was acquired for traditional publishing under a Nelson imprint, or called up to the big leagues if you prefer baseball terminology. And so as I've thought about the topic for this webcast, a few things that we've learned along the way came to mind that I would like to share. First up is simply that people want to be heard more than they want to listen. As evidenced by the hundreds of thousands of books published every year and the millions of blogs being written, one of the deepest human needs is to feel validated at some level. One of the ways everybody pursues this is by expressing ourselves and looking for some level of approval or recognition for what we've said. Unfortunately, we do not seem to have that same need to validate others. So there is an imbalance between the number of people who want to be heard and those who want to listen or to read, if you will. On the other hand, blogs and self-publishing companies offer opportunities for individuals to speak in ways that were not imaginable until just recently. I'll leave it to others to debate the significance of that fact that the number of words being created is increasing exponentially and does not show any sign of leveling off anytime soon. Nonetheless, we have an opportunity before us, and that's where Thomas Nelson decided to get involved in the space. So the second point is simply that the value of book publishing is equal to the amount authors are willing to pay to be published. It's one of the things we found out very early as we became more familiar with self-publishing space and explored how much value aspiring authors place on the services we provide. services ranging from editorial, production, distribution, marketing, sales, accounting, things that we kind of came to take for granted over the years, and yet we discovered that there was a price to each of those once you put them down on paper and put them on a menu in front of an aspiring author. And we also came to the realization that we were not properly valuing those services within Thomas Nelson. We took them for granted and didn't tend to bring them up much in discussions with even traditional authors and agents. And by doing so, that gave us a fresh perspective on what we do bring to the table in discussions with those authors and agents. Our expertise and relationships with other key players in the industry are some of the key assets that make us successful, and they're part of the reason we've been successful in the self-publishing space too. Next up, most readers don't care about imprint, but authors do. As much as I hate to say that, but as I was looking for an image, I stumbled across this image of a library patron out in the stacks and it contains an interesting detail that I had not really noticed until I found this image. The one part of the book that every library does not hesitate to cover up is the publisher's logo on the spine. And it must not be getting many complaints from readers, or that would have changed by now. At the same time, authors recognize that a publisher's expertise and relationships with other key players in the industry determine how successful it can be in creating quality books, marketing them well, and getting them placed on bookstore and library shelves. So when an author is looking to get published, they gravitate toward the publishers of the books they read, which is why Thomas Nelson and other publishers receive thousands of letters, emails, proposals, manuscripts every year from authors who would love to be published specifically by us. And that's really one of the key factors in our success is we have taken those contacts that we had on an ongoing basis, and rather than just sending letters in essence saying to leave us alone, we've turned that on its head and now welcome them with open arms and try to figure out how can we help them self-publish their book, market their book, get it into the marketplace as widely as possible. Probably a more controversial statement, but to some degree I think we all will acknowledge it's true, is that egos can inhibit learning and success. One of the things we had to do at Nelson and others will probably have to do too is just overcome the stigma that we have in our own minds, the preconceived notion towards self-publishing. Overcoming that perspective that self-publishing is just vanity publishing for authors who could not write well enough to be published traditionally, it can be difficult and it takes time. Even the recent success of books like The Shack and Amanda Hawking's books and others does not guarantee that that stigma will be eliminated anytime soon. I give credit to the executive team here at Nelson. They were able to quickly overcome those preconceived notions and to see an opportunity. In addition, we continue to work through similar notions with various team members in-house and with partners including retailers, agents, and the media. It's difficult work to be done, but nonetheless, as we've gone further down this path, we discovered that the blinders are falling off eyes, if you will, that self-publishing is a valuable service that can be provided in a variety of contexts. We keep coming back to the idea that we're expanding the choices available to authors and giving more of them the opportunity to be published. And isn't that what we're really all about, is not only providing readers with the books they want to read, but now we're actually providing writers with the opportunity to be published. In doing so, we increase the opportunities for everybody here, for editors, publicists, agents, graphic designers. There's just more opportunity to work with more authors. Another point that we've learned is that willingness to purchase is the best indication of felt need. We were aware of the growth in self-publishing overall, but we were not really quite certain as to the level of need for self-publishing services in our particular space. And we are an inspirational publisher, or Christian publisher, if you will, the biggest one in the world, but nonetheless, we were not quite certain just how widespread the demand would be for self-publishing service. So as we entered into it, we began offering a variety of packages and a menu of services, and we discovered that the needs and the demands are widespread and strongly felt. In addition, offering several hundred additional titles every year so far, as I mentioned, gives us an additional data on what readers want and need, even the prices they might be willing to pay. And that's provided additional evidence on the value of books to us also. Excuse me for a second. Let me go back. So readers are the best judgment of commercial appeal. Another benefit that we discovered as we offer hundreds more titles every year is the opportunity to consider each title as a test to what consumers might want. The topic, the price, format, page count, all of those things just come into play, and we've got more data now on each of those aspects. As a traditional publisher with a limited number of titles to acquire every year, the temptation was basically to acquire more of the same, to focus on the sure bets that we knew we could publish well and not publish so much around the fringes. And when we got into self-publishing and allowed the writers the freedom to publish whatever they wanted, we certainly published a wider variety of titles and have been surprised by some of the success. Self-publishing just brings a wider variety of titles and data on how the market is responding to us, and that's been very helpful to us. And last statement is simply that failure to test is equivalent to gambling. We found that we are more aware of the benefits of testing to help provide direction on subjects, pricing, and other data points. And the implied promise of Westbow is that it is a division of Thomas Nelson, and we are monitoring the marketplace's reaction to each and every title. We do that each month and provide insights to the publishers here at Thomas Nelson. And we also are looking at providing some of that information to some of the agents we work with so they can look at some of the clients they might be able to pick up. It's always been interesting to me that one of the idiosyncrasies of traditional publishing has been that we're willing to pay up front for relatively uncertain products. And so perhaps self-publishing is going to help us bring more certainty to the way we do business. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Pete. And as I suspected, given that there are a lot of traditional publishers on the webcast today, there's quite a few questions. So let's see how many of these we can get through. First of all, and I don't know how much you can share with us on this, but a couple questions about author contracts and rights and so forth. Are you able to shed any light or at least give us any kind of a 30,000-foot view of maybe the difference between an author contract for a Westbow title versus, say, a Thomas Nelson one?
Yeah, definitely. As we got into the self-publishing space and we're considering what to put into the agreement we would use when we work with authors, we truly decided we wanted to make it self-publishing. So unlike a traditional contract where the author is locked in for a number of years or for life plus 75 years or a wide variety of opportunities there, that we decided we would make it simply that the author is completely at freedom to cancel at any time if they decide they want to take their book someplace else. And that's that was kind of a shock to our system at first after coming from the traditional perspective, but we felt we needed to honor the reality that this is self-publishing. And so it's a different animal completely.
Yeah, very interesting. So what about on the distribution side? Do Westbow Press titles go to all the same retailers as the Thomas Nelson ones?
It's a little bit different in that we don't have our Nelson team selling the Westbow titles. We've got a dedicated team at Westbow that does that. But we definitely are taking advantage of the contacts we have and the list of accounts that we have. So we're pitching the Westbow titles to those same customers, but as you might imagine, it's just a different response to different titles along the way. And so we focus more on, certainly getting the titles into the local stores for the author and then expanding from there. And of course, all the titles are on Amazon and can be special ordered from Ingram or any of the distributors the stores might work with.
And then did you also mention that some of the self-published titles can graduate into sort of the traditional Thomas Nelson publishing imprint?
Yeah, every month. That's one of my responsibilities. Every month we go through the sales reports on the title-by-title Westbow sales results and look at how they're selling through different platforms and the reviews and the word of mouth on the Internet to the degree that we can. And I distribute a list of of the top titles to our publishers here at Nelson and get some feedback from them based on their requests. I'll then obtain the sample copies and provide those to our publishers here. And we just keep going down that path to acquire the titles that seem to make sense. But it really comes down to how the marketplace is responding. If the marketplace is not responding to a certain degree, then it's not going to get up on the Nelson radar. But those that do, we try to very quickly identify them. And at that point, we look at the true quality and how we think it'll fit within our publishing program.
And then I don't want to assume too much, but I'm guessing that you have to go back to those authors and get them to sign a new agreement. I'm also kind of guessing that the royalty rate may be less, but the distribution is broader. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way of looking at it. We'll go back to the author, and at that point it is a new negotiation with the author. And to be honest, they would have the opportunity at that point to say, well, let me shop it around to some other publishers too, or they might say, let me obtain an agent to do that for me. And we want to maintain the integrity of what we're trying to do, so we're not opposed to that. We certainly think that we have a first mover advantage to acquire those authors, but they could take it someplace else too. And then, yes, I think the terms are different certainly, but it is, at that point, it's a negotiation between author and publisher, just like any traditional agreement.
Okay. We have time for one last question. This one's from Agatha, and I was kind of wondering about this as well. How do you impose quality control to protect the brand?
We have editorial standards up front that are on the Westbow website, and basically they align with the Thomas Nelson editorial standards. We certainly don't want to publish anything that would go against our regular standards. And as an inspirational or Christian publisher, they're probably a bit more strict than many publishers. So we have those in place to begin with. And when an author signs with Westbow, they know that they have those standards to adhere to. We have had, over the course of the 1,500 or so authors we've acquired and the 600 books we've released, we've had, I think, 7 or 8 that we had quality concerns with or more content concerns with. And when that happens, we have that discussion with the author and see if we can work through them. And if we can't, well, then we simply look at perhaps finding a new home for that author's book someplace other than Westbow as a division of Thomas Nelson.
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks again, Pete. And I would ask if you've got some time maybe to go through. I did not get to all the questions in the group chat window, and if you wouldn't mind maybe addressing some of those in the chat window itself, that would be terrific.
Be happy to. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, our final speaker today is Bob Young, founder and CEO of Lulu.com. Lulu's numbers just simply make my head spin. They offer hundreds of thousands of titles, and more than 15,000 new content creators join the Lulu service every week. Lulu's been around since 2002, making them one of the seasoned veterans in this space, if you will. I think you'll appreciate the extensive experience Bob brings to our event. So, Bob, welcome to the webcast.
Joe, thank you very much. Joe, you asked me to do an introductory slide, so where am I?
It's up there. Oh, just went away.
If I go next. Hold on. Push to audience. No. How do I? Oh, there we go. Okay. Whoops. There it is. Okay, so now I control this if I click next. Is that right?
Yes, I believe that's right.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so I just thought by way of introduction I'd tell you a little bit about why we started Lulu as opposed to what Lulu is. And it really related to the phenomenon that we saw, and this was my experience in the open source world, where you run into so many creative people, whether they are software developers or filmmakers, or in the area that we're focusing on, authors and knowledge experts, who could not get published. The traditional publishing industry, in their effort, and it's a legitimate effort to deliver quality to their customers, by their own admission, rejected 19 out of 20 books that came their way. And of course, if you talk to any traditional publisher, he will tell you that he's doing this to save the world from 19 really bad books. And I can vouch for the fact that certainly some of the books that are rejected are not very high quality, but books get rejected for two other reasons. One is the publisher already has one of those books, so he has very little economic interest. Let's pick Economics 101. There are 6 Economics 101 textbooks available. Each of the 6 major textbook publishers offer one, and they don't have much incentive to offer a second one because it simply cannibalizes the economics of their first one, is one of the reasons. The other reason is the publisher has a huge amount of cost associated with that selection and preparation of the books that they do offer, and they have to sell a lot of books, a lot of any one title to make money on it. So they reject most of that 19 out of 20, not because they are bad books, but because they simply don't believe the book will sell enough copies. So that's kind of why we started Lulu, and what Lulu has become is a distributed print-on-demand supplier. We can print books in Australia and in Germany, or we can print books, of course, across the U.S. and in Canada, but we also do EPUB books and PDF books, and we help you get your book into a variety of distribution channels. But the fundamental thing that we're trying to do is put the power in the hands of the author. So, when it comes to things like DRM, we're completely agnostic. If your book requires DRM, because there's only 1,000 customers for your book on the planet, and if you give you run the risk, if you don't have any form of DRM on your book, that the first customer will buy your book, and then he'll publish it on his website or do something else foolish with it, and all 1,000 other customers end up getting the book for free, and you as the author do not get a chance to earn any money for the effort that you put into publishing that book. But again, that's up to you, and we think of it as an equation, the whole issue around DRM, which is simply, do you value distribution, as in are you trying to create an audience, more than you value control, as in you're trying to monetize your book, or is it the other way around? If you value distribution, don't even think about DRM. If you value control, as in your market is small, it's a very high quality or high value book you're selling, then possibly you should consider DRM. But this is up to you as the author or the publisher. And that's really where Lulu sort of started out. That's what we're about as a company. So when Joe invited me to this panel, Joe with O'Reilly, I was thrilled to accept, mostly because of the other smart guys on this panel. But nonetheless, when he explained that the topic of the panel was the self-publishing, what the self-publishing industry can teach traditional publishers, I put my good capitalist hat on, and I did a little bit of research, and I realized, no, I think Joe's got the premise backwards. So if we skip along, oops, hold on, someone's skipping along for me. Good job. If we take a look at the global publishing industry, self-publishing, so the total publishing industry is pushing $3 billion worldwide. The book piece of that industry is $100 billion. The self-publishing industry, as near as I can make out, and this is just a vast approximation, I'd be happy to be corrected by any of the other smart guys on this panel, but the self-publishing industry, as near as I can tell, has done very well. We should be very proud of ourselves. From a standing start, we've created a $500 million a year business. But $500 million is still only half of 1% of the book publishing industry in the world. So the question became one of, what does the traditional publishers have to teach us? And of course the answer is they are really, really good at discovering talent, at selecting the best of that talent, at packaging that talent, and most importantly, at selling that content. Because when you get right down to it, most authors don't want to sell their baby. You know, they put their heart and soul into their work. They publish it, and if they were actually out trying to flog it, and a customer said, no, I don't want your book, it's not a rejection of his book. It's a rejection of him as a human being. This is why most authors are desperate to have a publishing contract. They want a partnership with someone who will take responsibility for selling their book. So I would argue what the traditional publishing industry have to teach us, have to teach the self-publishing industry, is that we need a new generation of publishers. We need publishers who think like Thomas Nelson are thinking of how do you help this new generation of authors get their books to market. So that's kind of where Lulu is going, but it's also, I know, where other people are looking, which is how do you build tools to enable a publisher now to represent the authors in a transparent way, such that the authors remain in control of where they're going, and the publisher is empowered to use the tools that the self-publishers are inventing. Because I can't agree more with Mark and Chad with this concept that we're in a period of rapid experimentation. The rate of change in our industry is just astounding. It's either the reason that we're all going to get out of this business as quick as we can, or conversely, it's the reason you enjoy working here. It's truly a fascinating process. But skipping right to the point here, the point is that Adam Smith was right. That in a free market democracy, the citizen and the consumer are the same person, which means you can solve social problems in the marketplace, but you can only do it if you build an intelligent business around it, if you can actually get paid for the value you are creating. So this is where I actually do disagree with the point that Mark, who is a smart guy, was making when he was touting low price. Because the problem with low price is if there's no money on the books you're selling, and most books do not sell very many copies, you aren't going to get paid for the work you were doing creating that book. So some books, arguably if you're competing with John Grisham and you do not yet have a name or a brand, perhaps, a dollar price on your book will successfully convince readers to buy your book instead of the next John Grisham. But if you're selling quantum physics textbooks that took you a lifetime to develop the expertise to be able to write, you would better be able to figure out how to sell that book for $100, because the market for that quantum physics textbook is sufficiently small that if you aren't selling it for north of $100, you are not going to make enough money to justify writing the book. And this is the role that this next generation of publishers have to bring to the self-publishing industry if we are going to become relevant in the $100 billion publishing industry. Thanks, Joe. What questions do you have?
Okay, thanks, Bob. So we're kind of tight on time, but there's one question I wanted to ask, and it's kind of a combination of two things, and particularly with the volume of titles that Lulu has. Just wondering, and also in the news over the last week or so, all the concern over the spam content on the Kindle platform. Are you seeing that with Lulu? Is there an easy solution to it? And also, related to that, how much is discoverability a challenge for Lulu?
That's a very good question, and as my wife Nancy will tell you, my definition of a good question is one I don't know the answer to. But here's what I do know, and we've actually got some experiments. We put a lot of time and effort into a big social discovery tool at Lulu, and we abandoned that effort earlier this year, actually late last year, Mainly because while it worked really well, social discovery works really well at head content material. So if you want reviews of Harry Potter, you can get more reviews of Harry Potter if you feed those reviews back to the friends and family of the people who wrote the review. And our reviews, our numbers of reviews on head content was actually greater than the number of reviews Amazon was seeing for books like Harry Potter. The problem is we see the opportunity in the long tail. So we think of our business as the opposite of the traditional publisher who would love nothing better than to get his stable of authors down to 10, have each of those authors sell 1 million books a year, and then he can go to the beach. We think we're looking for 1 million authors. We're actually looking for 10 million authors, each of whom sell 1,000 books a year. You do the math, you realize we're much bigger than a traditional publisher if we achieve that. But the problem is if you're only selling 1,000 books a year, trying to get enough reviews, enough social discovery of those books becomes really difficult if there's only, maybe fewer than 1,000 people who will read your book and help you discover it. So we're looking at, we and everyone else, of course, both on this panel and at smart companies like Google and Amazon, are spending a lot of time working on this issue. And, Joe, the short answer to your question, the reason I don't know the answer is out there, and we're all working hard, but it is not yet apparent what the most effective way for the discovery of the truly great content that exists in Lulu and everyone else's library, but is not yet discovered. I would argue most content is sold, and this is where the role of this next generation of publisher comes from.
No, and I realize it was a loaded question, Bob. I apologize for dumping it on you like that. But, I see the issue on so many fronts. I mean, another obvious one is in the App Store for Apple. I find myself looking through every which way I can through however many apps came out today or this week or which ones are highly rated, but I've not found a good solution to really stay on top of the ones I'm most interested in. And even the Genius feature doesn't really cut it for me. So I do think this is one of the big issues today, and it's going to be even bigger tomorrow. But thanks again, Bob. I appreciate all your insight.
Thank you, Joe.
And thanks again to all of our speakers and for everyone who's attended today's webcast. I'd also like to remind everyone that our next TOC webcast is scheduled for this same time next week. So on Thursday, June 30th, we have Pete Myers presenting the first in a series of digital bookmaking tools roundups. Be sure to register now for this free event. And again, thank you all very much for taking part in today's webcast.